They used my land like it was already theirs, and they didn't even bother asking. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. I just shut their entire project down without stepping foot on their side of the fence. And the wild part is they still thought they were in the right. It started early, one of those mornings where the world hasn't fully decided to wake up yet. The sky was that pale gray blue, the kind that makes everything feel quieter than it actually is. I was out on my property like I usually am, just walking the perimeter, boots sinking a little into the soft ground from the night before, the air still carrying that damp, earthy smell you only get after light rain. No engines running, no shouting, no construction noise, just birds and distant traffic humming somewhere far off. That's when I saw it. At first, it didn't even register. My brain just kind of paused, like it was trying to make sense of something it wasn't ready to accept. Stacks of lumber, steel beams laid out in clean rows, pallets of bricks shrink-wrapped tight, like they'd been prepped for a showroom. All of it sitting right there on my land. Not scattered, not dumped, placed. Organized. Intentional. I remember just standing there, hands on my hips, not moving, just looking. Because that kind of setup doesn't happen by accident. There were forklift tracks pressed deep into the soil, cutting across the grass like tire scars, and what really got me was the fencing. Temporary construction fencing, the kind with metal panels, tied directly into one of my fence posts. Not near it, not next to it, tied into it, like my boundary was just another anchor point in their plan. That's the moment it clicked. They didn't think they were borrowing my land. They thought it was already part of theirs. Now, to understand why this even happened, you gotta know a little about where I was living at the time. This was just outside a small town called Ridgeline Creek, or at least, it used to be small. When I bought my 6 acres out there years ago, nobody wanted that stretch of land. No sidewalks, no streetlights, no fancy entrance signs, just open space, quiet nights, and a whole lot of nothing in between. That's exactly why I bought it. I wasn't looking for neighbors. I wasn't trying to invest or flip anything. I just wanted space. Room to breathe, room to build something simple. Maybe one day pass it down if I ever had kids. It was mine, and it was enough. Then things changed. Developers showed up, slow at first, just survey flags and a couple trucks, then all at once. Big signs went up, future home of Silver Ridge Estates, glossy renderings of houses that didn't exist yet, promises of community, growth, opportunity. You know the type. And right next to my land, that's where they started building. Now here's the thing. Their land wasn't like mine. Mine was flat, open, easy to access from the main road. Theirs was tight. Every inch measured, every lot carved out with precision, everything designed to squeeze maximum value out of limited space. Which meant one thing. They didn't have room for mistakes or storage. So they made a decision, not a mistake, a decision. They used mine. I walked the edge of the materials slowly, taking it all in, noticing details the longer I stood there. Spray paint marks on the dirt, grid lines, measurements, little coded numbers like instructions left behind for someone who already knew what they meant. And then I saw my boundary markers, or what was left of them, half buried, pushed aside, like they were in the way. I crouched down and brushed the dirt off one of the metal pins, just staring at it for a second, and I remember thinking how small it looked. That little piece of metal was the only thing separating what was mine from what wasn't, and to them, it didn't mean a thing. No phone call, no letter, no knock on the door, just action. And I'll be honest, part of me wanted to march straight over there, find whoever was in charge, and tear into them right then and there. I could already hear it in my head, the arguments, the excuses, the fake apologies. But something about the way everything was laid out, the confidence of it, told me this wasn't going to be solved with a conversation. They didn't cross the line by accident. So I didn't react right away. I just stood up, took one last look at everything they had placed on my land, and walked back to my truck like I hadn't seen a thing. But inside, I was already planning my next move. Later that morning, I drove over to their site office. It was one of those temporary trailers set up near the entrance, with blueprints taped to the walls and coffee cups scattered across every flat surface. You could hear the energy before you even walked in. Radios crackling, phones ringing, people moving fast like time was money. And to them it was. A guy stepped out to meet me before I even reached the door. Mid-40s maybe, clean boots, crisp vest, the kind of smile that feels practiced. He stuck his hand out like we were about to close a deal. "Morning," he said. You hear about one of the lots? I shook his hand, looked him straight in the eye, and said, no. I'm here about the materials sitting on my land. There was a pause, just a small one, but I saw it. That flicker of recognition. And then just like that, it was gone. Oh, that, he said, waving it off like it was nothing. Yeah, that's just temporary. We'll clear it when we're done. When we're done. I let that sit in the air for a second. Done with what? I asked. He smiled again, a little tighter this time. Construction, you know how it goes. We're just using that space for overflow. Overflow. Like my property was some kind of extra shelf they could use when theirs got full. I nodded slowly, like I understood, like I was considering it. Then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. Who approved that? He didn't hesitate this time. Nobody. He just shrugged. That was it. No explanation, no paperwork, no attempt to justify it. Just a shrug, like permission was optional. And right there, that's when I realized something. This wasn't about space. This was about assumption. They assumed I wouldn't notice, or worse, that even if I did, I wouldn't do anything about it. And standing there, looking at that man trying to sell me on the idea that my land was temporary storage, I made a decision. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to threaten. I wasn't even going to warn them. I was going to let them keep going, just long enough for it to cost them. I shook his hand again, smiled back just enough to match his energy, and said, all right, I understand. And then I walked away. But not because I accepted it, because I had already started setting the trap. I didn't go back to the site that day, not because I didn't care, but because I knew exactly what I needed more than anything else in that moment. Time to slow everything down, time to make sure every step I took next was clean, documented, and impossible to argue with. Because the truth is, guys like that project manager, they're used to noise. They expect yelling, threats, maybe even a lawyer letter if things get serious. What they don't expect is silence followed by precision. I got home, walked straight past the kitchen, past the half-finished coffee I'd left sitting there earlier, and went right to the old file cabinet in the corner of the living room. It wasn't anything fancy, just a dented metal cabinet I'd had for years, the kind that sticks a little when you pull the drawer open. But inside, that was where everything that mattered lived. I pulled out the folder labeled with my name and the parcel number, flipped it open on the table, and just started laying things out one by one. Deed, survey map, tax records, old correspondence from when I first bought the land. Every line, every boundary, every coordinate, all of it clean, all of it clear. And I'll tell you something. There's a certain kind of calm that comes over you when you realize you're standing on solid ground, not just physically, but legally. No gray areas, no shared access agreements, no easements they could twist into an excuse. That land was mine. End of story. By noon, I had everything I needed. By early afternoon, I had a plan. Now here's where it gets interesting, because I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. I didn't send a warning letter, didn't try to negotiate, didn't even give them a second chance to fix it quietly. And some people might say that was harsh, maybe even unnecessary. But here's the thing, they already had their chance. They made a choice without me, so I made mine without them. The next morning, I loaded up the back of my truck with a stack of signs I had printed overnight. Big ones, bright, impossible to ignore. White background, bold black letters. No decoration, no fluff, just straight to the point. Private property. No storage. No trespassing. I drove out there just after sunrise again. Same quiet air, same damp ground. But this time, it felt different. Not peaceful, focused. They were already working when I arrived. Trucks moving in and out. Workers unloading materials, forklifts beeping as they maneuvered around the site. Everything running like a machine that had no intention of stopping. And that was fine. I wasn't there to stop it. Not yet. I parked along the edge of my property, grabbed the first sign, and started walking the exact boundary line. Not where they thought it was, not where they had shifted it to, but where it actually was. Every step measured against the survey I had memorized the night before. A couple workers noticed me pretty quickly. You can't really miss a guy walking through a construction zone planting signs like he owns the place, which, in this case, I did. One of them slowed down his forklift, watching me as I drove the first post into the ground. Hey, he called out. You with the developer? I didn't even look up. No, I said, steady and calm. This is my land. That got his attention. He shut the engine off, climbed down, and walked a few steps closer. Not aggressive, just confused. Uh, we were told this area was cleared for use, he said. I nodded. I know, I replied, pressing the sign firmly into place. You were told wrong. And that was the end of that conversation. I kept moving, one sign after another, each one marking the line they had crossed. You could feel the shift happening as I worked. Conversations getting quieter, movements slowing down, people glancing at each other like something wasn't adding up anymore. Because deep down they knew. Construction crews, they know when something's off. They might not get involved, but they recognize when a line's been crossed, literally. By the time I finished, there was no confusion left. The boundary wasn't invisible anymore. It was staring them in the face, written in bold letters every 20 feet. That's when I made the call. County Code Enforcement. Now, if you've never dealt with code enforcement before, let me explain something. They don't rush. They don't panic. They don't show up yelling or trying to make a scene. They show up calm, methodical, and they document everything. And documentation, that's what shuts projects down. They arrived just before lunch. 2 vehicles, nothing flashy. The kind of presence that doesn't look like much at first, until you realize what it means. The same project manager from the day before came walking over, still wearing that confident expression, but it didn't last long once he saw who stepped out of those cars. One of the officers walked straight up to me. You the property owner? He asked. Yes, sir. He nodded once, then turned his attention to the site. And just like that, everything changed. They didn't argue. They didn't ask for opinions. They measured distances, took photos, checked permits, compared everything against recorded boundaries. Every pallet of bricks, every steel beam, every piece of equipment that even touched my land suddenly wasn't just material anymore. It was evidence. I stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching it all unfold, not saying a word. The project manager tried to step in at one point, talking fast, explaining that it was temporary, that they were in the process of adjusting logistics, that it was a misunderstanding. But none of that mattered, because none of it was written down. And in situations like this, if it's not written, it doesn't exist. About 40 minutes in, one of the officers walked over to their trailer, pulled out a stack of papers, and started posting notices. Bright, unmistakable. Stop work order. Right there, front and center. You could feel it hit the site like a wave. The forklift that had been moving nonstop since I arrived stopped mid-turn. A crane operator froze with a load hanging halfway in the air, unsure whether to move or wait. Trucks that had just pulled in were turned around at the entrance before they even got unloaded. No shouting, no chaos, just silence. The kind of silence that only happens when something big just went wrong. The project manager stood there staring at the notice like he was trying to will it away, like if he looked hard enough, it might disappear. But it didn't, because this wasn't something he could smooth over with a handshake. This was official. This was recorded. And most importantly, this was expensive. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to remind him what he had told me the day before about it being temporary. Because now, the consequences weren't temporary at all. They were immediate. And they were real. I turned to leave, figured I'd seen enough, but before I made it back to my truck, I heard him call out behind me. Hey, I stopped, but I didn't turn around right away. Let him walk up. Let him close the distance. When I finally turned, the smile was gone. Completely gone. What was left was frustration mixed with something else. Pressure. You could have just talked to us, he said, voice tight, trying to keep it together. I looked at him for a second, really looked this time, and then I said, I did. That landed harder than anything else I could have said, because we both knew it was true. He opened his mouth like he was about to respond, but nothing came out. No comeback, no argument, just silence. And in that moment, the power had shifted. Completely. I got in my truck, started the engine, and drove off, leaving behind a project that, just 24 hours earlier, thought it could use my land without consequence. Now it couldn't use anything at all. I didn't go back the next day, or the day after that. Not because I wasn't curious, but because I already knew what I'd see, a stalled machine trying to figure out how to start again. And there's something about stepping away at the right moment, letting the pressure build without you standing there to absorb it, that makes everything hit a little harder on the other side. Still, word travels fast in places like Ridgeline Creek, especially when money's involved. By the third day, I didn't need to drive past the site to know what was happening. I heard it at the gas station, at the feed store, Even from my neighbor Carl, who lived about half a mile down the road and somehow always knew everything before it officially became news. You shut them down? He asked me, leaning against his truck like he'd been waiting all morning just to catch me. I shrugged a little, kept it casual. I didn't shut anything down, they just ran into a problem. Carl laughed, shook his head. Yeah, a 6-acre problem. And that right there, that's when it started to sink in. This wasn't just about my land anymore. This had turned into a story. The kind people tell with a little grin, the kind that spreads because deep down, folks like seeing someone push back when something doesn't sit right. But not everyone saw it that way. That same afternoon, I got a call, number I didn't recognize. I let it ring the first time, second time too, third time. I picked up. This is Daniel Mercer. There was a pause on the other end, then a voice, sharper than the project manager's, more controlled, the kind of voice that's used to getting results. Mr. Mercer, this is Jonathan Hale with Silver Ridge Development. So now the owner shows up. I believe we need to talk. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window toward my land, still quiet, still mine. I think we already did, I said. Another pause, longer this time. With all due respect, he replied, tone tightening just a bit. What's happening out here is costing us a significant amount of money every day. I'm sure that's not your intention. And there it was. Not an apology, not a question, a pressure move. I let out a small breath, not annoyed, not angry, just clear. You're right, I said. It's not my intention. Then I added, just enough space between the words for it to land. But it is your consequence. Silence. Real silence this time. No quick response, no polished follow-up line, just the sound of someone on the other end realizing the conversation wasn't going the way they expected. We'd like to resolve this, he finally said, voice shifting. Less edge, more calculation now. If you're open to a discussion. I glanced down at the paperwork still sitting on my table, neat, untouched since the day I laid it out. I'm always open to a discussion, I said, just not on assumptions. We agreed to meet the next morning. Now I'll tell you something honestly. That night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious, didn't sit there thinking I'd won anything. Because situations like this, they're not clean. There's always that question sitting in the back of your mind, that little voice asking if you push too hard, if you could have handled it differently, if maybe, just maybe, there was a version of this where nobody had to take a hit. But then I thought about that morning, the fencing tied into my post, the boundary markers pushed aside, the way he shrugged when I asked who approved it. And that question got real quiet. The next day, we met at my place. Not their office. Not neutral ground. My land. Jonathan Hale showed up in a black SUV, stepped out in a pressed shirt, clean shoes, the kind of guy who looks like he belongs in a boardroom, not standing on damp soil in the middle of someone else's property. He looked around for a second, really looked, like he was seeing the space for what it actually was, not just what it could be used for. I can see why you value this, he said. That was the first honest thing anyone from his side had said. We didn't shake hands right away, just stood there, a few feet apart, both of us understanding that this wasn't a friendly visit. You've put us in a difficult position, he continued. I tilted my head slightly. No, you walked into one. That hit, not hard, but clean. He nodded once they accepted it. Fair enough. And just like that, the tone shifted again. No more pretending. No more soft language. Just business. We walked the boundary together, step by step, and for the first time since this whole thing started, they followed my lead. Every marker I pointed out, they acknowledged. Every line I referenced, they respected. Funny how fast things become clear when they have to be. Back near the center of the property, he stopped and turned to me. What do you want? He asked. Simple question. Not easy, but simple. I took a second before answering, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to say it right. I want my land back the way it was, I said. No materials, no damage, no questions about where the line is. I want it restored completely. He nodded slowly. And I met his eyes. And I want acknowledgement in writing that it's mine. No temporary use, no gray areas, no we thought, just clear. He didn't argue, didn't push back, because at that point, he couldn't. And a usage fee, I added, calm as ever. That one made him exhale through his nose, just a little. Not frustration, more like respect mixed with reality. Of course, he said. We worked out the details over the next hour, numbers, timelines, responsibilities. No raised voices, no last-minute tricks. Just two people standing on a piece of land, deciding exactly where the line was going to stay. By the end of the week, everything changed. Crews came in not to build, but to remove. Every pallet, every beam, every piece of equipment gone. The soil was leveled, compacted, restored. New boundary markers were installed, properly this time, measured twice, documented, signed off. And the paperwork, that was airtight. Signed agreement, usage compensation, acknowledgement of property lines, everything clean, everything final. The stop work order? Lifted. Their project? Back on track. And my land? Quiet again. Like none of it ever happened. Except it did. Because here's the thing nobody really talks about. Situations like this don't just change what happens around you. They change how you see things. Before all this, I used to think most conflicts came from misunderstanding, honest mistakes, crossed wires, things that could be talked through if both sides just sat down. And sometimes that's true, but not always. Sometimes, people know exactly what they're doing. They just bet on you not doing anything about it. And maybe that's the part that sticks with me the most, not the shutdown, not the agreement, not even the money. It's the assumption, the idea that boundaries are flexible until someone decides they're not. Now every once in a while, I'll drive past that development, finished homes, neat lawns, families moving in, kids riding bikes down streets that didn't exist when I first bought my land. And right at the edge of it all, there's a clean, clear line where it stops, and where mine begins. No confusion, no overlap, just space, the way it was always meant to be. But I'll leave you with this, because not everyone agrees with how I handled it. Some people say I should have given them a warning, worked something out before calling enforcement, maybe even let it slide for the sake of being a good neighbor. Maybe they're right. Or maybe, if I had done that, nothing would have changed. So I'm curious, what would you have done? Would you have handled it quietly, or made sure it was never ignored again? Let me know in the comments. Because honestly, this is one of those situations where right and wrong don't always look the same from both sides. And if you enjoy stories like this, real situations, real decisions, real consequences, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. Because sometimes, the smallest line on the ground turns out to be the one that matters most.